What if a quiet lawyer, determined to protect her father's legacy, found herself locked in a battle against the most powerful force in her community, the self-appointed queen of the HOA? Samantha Green's sneakers pounded the pavement of Willow Creek, each step a rhythmic release from the weight of her day. At 38, she was a striking figure. Auburn hair swept into a tight ponytail, green eyes sharp with the focus that had earned her the nickname the Bulldog in Denver's legal circles. As a corporate lawyer, Samantha had built a reputation for dismantling opponents with calm, relentless precision, taking down CEOs and corporate giants who underestimated her quiet strength. Her morning jogs were her sanctuary, a way to escape the high-stakes world of mergers, acquisitions, and multi-million-dollar lawsuits that defined her career. The rhythm of her steps, the cool October air against her skin, the distant hum of the Rockies, it all grounded her, pulling her back to the one place that truly mattered, the ranch. The ranch was more than a home, it was a living testament to her father, Thomas Green. He built it in the 1970s, when Willow Creek was just a scattering of homes on open land, pouring his soul into every detail. The cedar siding weathered to a warm gray, the wildflower garden that bloomed defiantly against the encroaching suburban sprawl, the stone path winding to the heavy oak front door. Samantha's childhood was woven into the land, running barefoot through the fields, her father's laughter echoing as he taught her the names of every plant, from the delicate columbine to the sturdy sagebrush. She remembered summer evenings on the porch, her father pointing out constellations, telling her stories of the homesteaders who'd once worked this land, their resilience etched into the soil. When he died 5 years ago, leaving her the ranch, Samantha made a silent vow to honor him. She spent countless weekends restoring it, sanding floors until her hands blistered, replanting native grasses, and preserving the rustic charm that set it apart from the cookie-cutter mansions of Willow Creek. The ranch was her anchor, a place where the world's chaos couldn't touch her. Willow Creek had transformed since her childhood. Once a quiet community of families who knew each other's names, it was now an enclave of wealth, where million-dollar homes hid behind manicured hedges and wrought iron gates. The Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron grip, its bylaws dictating everything from paint colors to lawn heights to the acceptable shade of mailbox gray. Samantha didn't mind the rules. She followed them meticulously, not out of fear but out of respect for the community her father had helped establish decades ago, when he and a handful of others drafted the first HOA charter. She'd grown up here in this very house before Willow Creek became a status symbol for Denver's elite. She attended the occasional HOA meeting, nodded politely through debates over tree trimming schedules or fence height restrictions, and kept her head down. She wasn't here to make enemies, she just wanted to live in peace, to tend her garden and honor her father's memory. But peace was a fragile thing in Willow Creek, and its greatest threat was Janet Wilkins. Janet, 52, was the HOA's self-appointed queen, her blonde bob so perfect it seemed sculpted from resin. Her pastel cardigans, pearl earrings, and perpetually pursed lips were a uniform, signaling her authority to anyone who dared cross her. As a decade-long board member, Janet wielded her power like a scepter, her gavel slamming down on any perceived infraction. To her, Willow Creek was her kingdom and she was its enforcer. Neighbors called her Karen in hushed tones, a nickname earned through years of petty tyranny. She'd fined the Wilsons $200 for planting tulips instead of daisies, claiming they clashed with the neighborhood palate. She called animal control on the Garcias golden retriever, Luna, for a single bark, alleging it disrupted the community's tranquility. She threatened to sue the Patels for a basketball hoop that was half an inch too high, citing safety concerns. Janet didn't just enforce rules, she invented them, twisting bylaws to settle personal grudges under the guise of community standards. Her reign wasn't without resistance. Mrs. Garcia, a retired schoolteacher with a sharp tongue, had once called Janet out at a meeting, earning a $500 fine for disorderly conduct. Mr. Patel, a software engineer, had tried to rally neighbors against her, only to face a barrage of citations for minor infractions. Grass too long, mailbox slightly tilted, garage door left open for an hour. The Wilsons, a young couple with a newborn, kept their heads down after the tulip incident, too exhausted to fight. Mrs. Nguyen, a quiet widow who rarely left her house, had stopped attending meetings after Janet criticized her rose garden for being too tall. Most residents complied, grumbling in private but unwilling to challenge Janet's authority. She had allies on the board, Mrs. Henderson, a sycophant who nodded at everything Janet said, and Mr. Klein, a retired accountant who'd been on the board so long he barely paid attention. Together, they ensured Janet's word was law. Samantha had always stayed off Janet's radar. Her ranch was pristine, its wildflower garden compliant with HOA guidelines, its paperwork impeccable. She smiled at Janet during meetings, ignoring the woman's barbed comments about newcomers who didn't understand the neighborhood's history. Samantha wasn't a newcomer. Her family had lived here before Willow Creek was even a name, but she let the remarks slide. She'd faced worse adversaries in courtrooms, where CEOs and corporate sharks underestimated her, only to crumble under her relentless cross-examinations. Neighborhood drama was beneath her. She had bigger battles to fight: mergers, acquisitions, lawsuits that shaped industries. But trouble has a way of finding you even when you're trying to avoid it. And on a crisp Saturday afternoon in October, trouble came knocking in the form of Janet Wilkins. Samantha's best friend, Claire Martinez, had warned her about Janet months ago, over coffee at a downtown cafe. Claire, a real estate agent who'd sold half the homes in Willow Creek, knew the neighborhood's underbelly. "She's got a vendetta against anyone who doesn't bow to her," Claire said, stirring her latte. "Your ranch is a target. It's too unique, too valuable. Watch out, Sam." Samantha had laughed it off, thinking her compliance would keep her safe. But as she stood in her driveway that afternoon, Janet's voice ringing in her ears, she realized Claire had been right. This was no ordinary HOA dispute, it was war. Samantha returned from her jog, her cheeks flushed, her breath steady. The air smelled of cut grass in autumn, and she was mentally planning her evening. A glass of Merlot, a few pages of the novel on her nightstand, maybe a call to her sister, Emily, in Seattle to catch up on her niece's latest adventures. She was halfway up her driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under her sneakers grounding her, when a voice cut through the quiet like a shard of glass. "Samantha Green. You're in violation." Samantha froze, turning to see Janet Wilkins standing on the sidewalk, her phone raised like a weapon, snapping photos of the front gate. Janet's eyes gleamed with triumph, her lips curled into a smug smile that made Samantha's stomach twist. The woman's pastel cardigan was buttoned to the top, her pearls catching the fading sunlight, her blonde bob unmoved by the breeze. She looked like a predator who'd finally cornered her prey, her posture radiating a confidence that bordered on mania. "Excuse me?" Samantha said, wiping sweat from her brow. Her voice was calm, measured, the way she spoke when cross-examining a hostile witness. She'd learned long ago to keep her emotions in check, but something about Janet's tone set her nerves on edge. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the glee in Janet's eyes, the way she seemed to relish the moment. "You heard me," Janet snapped, stepping closer, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. "You've made unauthorized changes to your property. That gate, those hinges are rusted. And don't think I didn't notice the new gravel in your driveway. It's not regulation color. You're trespassing on your own property by even standing there after hours." Samantha blinked, momentarily stunned. The accusation was so absurd it bordered on farce. Trespassing? On her own land? The gate was the same one her father had installed 20 years ago, its iron hinges polished every spring as part of her maintenance routine. The gravel hadn't been touched in years, its soft gray hue unchanged since she'd moved back after her father's death. She almost laughed, but the venom in Janet's voice stopped her. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was an attack, personal and calculated, designed to humiliate her in front of the neighborhood. "Janet," Samantha said, her tone still even, "the gate is original. The hinges are fine, I polished them last month. The gravel is the same as always. I haven't changed anything. If you'd like, I can show you my maintenance records." "Don't lie to me," Janet shrieked, her voice echoing across the street. A few neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Garcia stood on her porch, her arms crossed, watching silently. The Patel's teenage son, Arjun, paused his basketball game, his eyes wide. Mr. Wilson, trimming his hedge, stopped to stare. Mrs. Nguyen, the quiet widow who rarely left her house, cracked her window open, her face barely visible. "I'm reporting this to the HOA and the police. You think you can flout the rules just because you live in that fancy ranch? You're done, Samantha." Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but Janet was already storming off, her phone still clutched like a trophy, her heels clicking furiously. Samantha stood there, her heart pounding, not from fear but from a growing sense of outrage. She'd dealt with bullies before, in boardrooms and courtrooms, where power-hungry executives tried to intimidate her with bluster and lies. But this was different. This was her home, her father's legacy, and Janet was trying to tarnish it with fabricated accusations. Samantha's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to breathe. She wasn't going to let Janet's tantrum ruin her day. Not yet. An hour later, a police cruiser pulled into her driveway, its lights flashing silently. Two officers stepped out, an older man with graying hair and a tired expression, and a younger woman with sharp eyes and a notepad. Samantha met them at the gate, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. She stood tall, her hands steady, her voice calm but firm, the way she addressed juries when the stakes were high. "Officers, I own this property," she said, gesturing to the ranch. "The deed is in my name. I've lived here for years. Whatever Mrs. Wilkins told you, it's baseless." The older officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Daniels, nodded. "We got a call about trespassing and property damage. Mind if we take a look around?" Samantha gestured for them to follow. "Be my guest." As they walked the property, she pointed out the meticulously maintained garden, its wildflowers blooming in orderly rows, compliant with every HOA guideline. She showed them the gate, its hinges gleaming in the sunlight, and the gravel unchanged since her father's time. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to time-stamped photos from her restoration project, proving the gate and gravel were as they'd always been. She even showed them a maintenance log, detailing every repair she'd made to the property since moving back. Dates, receipts, even photos of the polished hinges. The younger officer, Officer Chin, scribbled notes, her brow furrowed. Sergeant Daniels inspected the gate, running a hand over the hinges. "Looks fine to me," he said, glancing at Chin. "No signs of damage or unauthorized changes." Chin nodded, her expression skeptical. "She mentioned something about after-hours restrictions. You know anything about that?" Samantha shook her head. "There's no such rule in the HOA bylaws. I've read them cover to cover. I can show you a copy if you'd like." Daniels sighed, rubbing his temple. "Sounds like a civil matter, not a police issue. We'll talk to Mrs. Wilkins, but I don't see anything here that warrants charges." Samantha thanked them, her face composed, but inside, her mind was racing. Janet wasn't just a nuisance, she was dangerous. This wasn't about a gate or gravel, it was about power, control, and something deeper. Samantha could feel it in her bones, the way she felt a case shifting in the courtroom when a witness slipped or a document revealed a hidden truth. Janet was hiding something, and Samantha was going to find out what. As the officers drove away, Samantha glanced across the street. Mrs. Garcia was still on her porch, her eyes meeting Samantha's. She gave a small nod as if to say, "We're with you." Arjun Patel, bouncing his basketball, flashed a thumbs up. Mrs. Nguyen closed her window but lingered, watching. Mr. Wilson resumed trimming his hedge, but his glance toward Samantha was one of respect. The neighborhood was watching, waiting, and Samantha felt the weight of their expectations. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was theirs. That evening, Samantha sat at her dining room table, a glass of untouched Merlot beside her laptop. The ranch was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She opened her legal database, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pulled up HOA records, property deeds, and county filings. Janet's accusations weren't just petty, they were defamatory, potentially actionable. Samantha had spent her career dismantling corporate giants who abused power, from oil executives hiding environmental violations to tech CEOs dodging tax fraud. A neighborhood tyrant wasn't going to intimidate her. She started with the HOA's bylaws, combing through the dense legalese for any mention of after-hours restrictions or gravel color regulations. There were none. Janet's claims were pure fiction, a power grab dressed up as policy. But as Samantha dug deeper, she found something more troubling: discrepancies in the HOA's land records. A half-acre parcel along the western boundary of her ranch had been reclassified as community land 5 years ago, a change she'd never been notified of. The documents bore Janet's signature as the approving board member, along with a vague reference to beautification needs. Samantha's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about a gate or gravel, it was about her land, her father's legacy. She spent the next few days gathering evidence, her lawyer's instincts in overdrive. She called in favors from colleagues at her firm, including her mentor, David Kessler, a grizzled attorney who taught her how to spot a paper trail. "Follow the money," he said over the phone, his voice gruff. "If she's stealing land, there's a profit motive somewhere." Samantha accessed county records, digging through dusty archives at the clerk's office until her eyes burned. She spent hours at the county recorder's office, poring over microfiche and digital scans, tracing property lines back to the 1960s. She found inconsistencies in other neighbors' records too: small parcels shaved off the Garcias' backyard, the Patel's fence line, the Wilsons' garden plot, even Mrs. Nguyen's rose garden. The pattern was clear. Janet was systematically annexing land, piece by piece, under the guise of community projects. Samantha interviewed longtime neighbors, starting with Mrs. Garcia, who invited her over for tea and homemade tamales. Mrs. Garcia, her gray hair pulled into a bun, recalled a heated HOA meeting in 2018, where Janet pushed through the reclassification of Samantha's land, dismissing objections as uninformed. She'd bullied the board into compliance, claiming the land was needed for a community park that never materialized. "She's been doing this for years," Mrs. Garcia said, her voice low. "She picks on people who won't fight back, newcomers, retirees, single parents." Mr. Patel shared a similar story over coffee in his kitchen, showing Samantha a survey map of his backyard, where a strip of land had been annexed for a drainage project that was never built. He'd received a $300 fine for questioning it, which he paid to avoid further harassment. The Wilsons, still bitter about their tulip fine, mentioned losing a corner of their garden to a beautification initiative they'd never approved. Mrs. Nguyen, speaking softly through her screen door, described how Janet had criticized her rose garden before annexing a row of bushes for a community pathway that never appeared. The deeper Samantha dug, the uglier it got. Janet had been manipulating HOA records for over a decade, reclassifying small parcels from multiple properties as community assets. These parcels were then leased to a developer, Willow Investments, for nominal fees, $1,000 here, $2,000 there. The profits were funneled into a shell company called Crestview Holdings, owned by Janet's brother-in-law, Carl Thompson, a real estate agent with a reputation for shady dealings. Public records showed Carl had purchased a vacation home in Aspen, a yacht in Miami, and a luxury SUV, far beyond the means of a mid-level agent. Samantha found tax filings for Crestview Holdings, revealing annual profits of over $500,000, all tied to leases in Willow Creek and nearby developments. The scheme was clever, small enough to go unnoticed by busy homeowners, but lucrative enough to make Janet and Carl rich. Samantha's half-acre was the largest theft yet, likely targeted because of its prime location near a planned commercial development, a retail plaza that promised to boost property values by 20%. But the most shocking discovery came late one night, as Samantha sifted through her father's old files in the attic. The air was thick with dust, the cedar chest creaking as she opened it. Among the yellowed letters, faded photos, and old tax returns was a DNA test Thomas had taken in 2010 as part of a genealogy project. The results were unremarkable at the time, listing distant cousins across Colorado. But cross-referencing them with public records revealed a bombshell. Janet's late husband, Robert Wilkins, a former HOA board member who died in 2015, was a distant cousin of Thomas Green. The connection was thin, a shared ancestor from the 1830s, a homesteader named Eliza Carter who'd owned land in the area that later became Willow Creek. But it explained Janet's obsession with Samantha's ranch. She wasn't just jealous, she believed she had a claim to the land, however tenuous, and had been scheming to undermine Samantha's ownership for years, possibly even before Robert's death. Samantha leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just fraud, it was personal. Janet wasn't just stealing land, she was trying to erase Samantha's family history, to rewrite the story of Willow Creek to suit her own narrative. Samantha's father had taught her to fight for what mattered, not with anger but with precision. She'd taken down corporate titans who thought they were untouchable. Janet Wilkins didn't stand a chance. But Samantha knew she needed more than evidence, she needed a strategy. She spent the next 2 weeks refining her case, consulting with David Kessler, who warned her that Janet would fight dirty. "People like her don't go down easy," he said over coffee at a downtown cafe, his eyes narrowing. "She'll have allies, maybe even on the board. Watch your back." Samantha nodded, her resolve hardening. She hired a private investigator, Maria Lopez, a former cop with a knack for digging up dirt. Maria uncovered a trail of shady transactions, including emails between Carl and the CEO of Willow Investments, discussing priority parcels that included Samantha's land. She also tracked down a retired surveyor, Mr. Ellison, who confirmed the original boundaries of the ranch, proving the reclassification was fraudulent. Maria's biggest find was a whistleblower, a former assistant to Carl named Tara Evans, who'd kept copies of incriminating emails as insurance after Carl fired her for asking questions about Crestview Holdings. Samantha's evenings became a blur of research and planning, her dining room table covered in documents, sticky notes, and empty coffee mugs. She barely slept, driven by a fire she hadn't felt since her early days as a lawyer, when she'd taken on her first big case against a pharmaceutical giant. This wasn't just about her, It was about her neighbors, her community, her father's memory. She needed allies, and she found them in the people Janet had wronged. She met with Mrs. Garcia over tea, promising to restore her backyard. She visited Mr. Patel, sketching out a plan to recover his land. She knocked on Mrs. Nguyen's door, listening patiently as the widow recounted her love for her lost rose bushes. She even approached the Thompsons, the young couple new to Willow Creek, who were shocked to learn their backyard had been shaved by a foot for a utility easement that didn't exist. Slowly, Samantha built a coalition, a quiet army of neighbors tired of Janet's reign. But the fight wasn't without cost. Samantha's sister Emily called one night, worried about the toll it was taking. "You're burning yourself out, Sam," she said, her voice soft over the phone. "Dad wouldn't want you to lose yourself in this." Samantha swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I'm not losing myself, Em. I'm finding myself. This is for him." Emily sighed but didn't argue. She knew Samantha's stubborn streak, inherited from their father, was unbreakable. Samantha didn't confront Janet immediately. She was a lawyer, not a hothead. She spent 8 weeks building her case, gathering affidavits from neighbors, copies of falsified deeds, and financial records linking Janet to Crestview Holdings. She cross-referenced county records, interviewed former HOA board members, and worked with Maria Lopez to compile a dossier on Carl Thompson's dealings. Tara Evans, the whistleblower, provided a USB drive with over 300 emails, including one where Janet bragged about securing the green parcel for the retail plaza. Mr. Ellison, the surveyor, signed a sworn statement confirming the original boundaries of Samantha's ranch. Maria even uncovered a hidden bank account in Carl's name, with deposits matching the lease payments from Willow Investments. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall she was building, and she was determined to make it airtight. When she was ready, she requested an emergency HOA meeting, inviting every resident of Willow Creek. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Janet sat at the head table, her usual smug smile in place, flanked by her loyal board allies, Mrs. Henderson, who nodded at everything Janet said, and Mr. Klein, who'd been on the board so long he barely paid attention. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in, sensing something big was coming. Mrs. Garcia sat in the front row, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on Janet. The Patels were there, Arjun whispering to his sister, Priya. The Wilsons, usually absent, sat near the back, their newborn asleep in a carrier. Mrs. Nguyen took a seat near the door, clutching a photo of her rose garden. The Thompsons, new to the neighborhood, sat wide-eyed, clutching hands. Even Mr. Ellison, the surveyor, showed up, his presence a quiet show of support. Samantha stood, her posture relaxed but her eyes blazing with purpose. She held a thick folder of documents, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I've called this meeting to address a serious issue, fraud within our HOA." The room fell silent. Janet's smile faltered, her hands tightening on the table. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, while Mr. Klein looked up from his phone, confused. Samantha projected scans of the falsified deeds onto a screen, highlighting Janet's signature. She showed financial records linking Crestview Holdings to Willow Investments, and affidavits from neighbors who'd lost land. Mrs. Garcia's backyard, Mr. Patel's fence line, the Wilsons' garden plot, Mrs. Nguyen's rose garden, the Thompsons' backyard. She walked the room through the scheme step by step, how Janet reclassified private property as community land, leased it to a developer for pennies, and funneled the profits to her brother-in-law's shell company. She presented emails between Janet and Carl, obtained through a public records request, that showed their coordination. She played a recorded interview with Mr. Ellison, who confirmed the original boundaries of her ranch. She read excerpts from Tara Evans' emails, including Janet's boast about securing the green parcel. She even showed bank statements from Crestview Holdings, with deposits matching the lease payments. The evidence was a tidal wave, each document crashing down on Janet's carefully constructed facade. The residents gasped, whispered, and turned to Janet, whose face had gone pale. Her hands trembled as she stood, her voice shrill. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "Samantha Green is a liar. She's trying to deflect from her own violations. This is a witch hunt." But the evidence was undeniable. Mrs. Garcia stood, her voice shaking with anger. "You fined us for our dog, but you never told us you took part of our backyard for your so-called community project." Mr. Patel joined her, recounting how Janet had pressured him to remove his basketball hoop while quietly annexing a strip of his land. The Wilsons shared their story, their voices rising with years of pent-up frustration. Mrs. Nguyen, usually silent, spoke up, her voice soft but piercing. "You told me my roses were too tall, but you took my land for your profit. I trusted you." The Thompsons, new to the neighborhood, looked horrified, realizing the HOA they joined was a house of cards. Mr. Ellison nodded from the back, his presence lending weight to Samantha's claims. One by one, the residents turned on Janet, their murmurs growing into a chorus of outrage. Samantha pressed forward, her voice calm but relentless. "Mrs. Wilkins has abused her power for over a decade, profiting at our expense. She's betrayed our trust, our homes, our community. This ends tonight." The room erupted in applause. Janet's allies on the board shifted uncomfortably, distancing themselves as the tide turned. Mrs. Henderson mumbled something about misunderstandings, while Mr. Klein stared at the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Samantha proposed a vote to remove Janet from the board, and it passed unanimously, a rare moment of unity in Willow Creek's history. Janet stormed out, her face a mask of fury, but not before Samantha served her with legal papers. A civil suit for defamation, fraud, and emotional distress, seeking punitive damages. The next morning, Samantha reported the matter to the district attorney, providing her evidence in a neatly organized binder. She met with the DA's office, walking them through the scheme with the same precision she'd used in the HOA meeting. The police returned that afternoon, this time to question Janet, who was escorted from her home in full view of the neighbors she'd once terrorized. Mrs. Garcia watched from her porch, a satisfied smile on her face. Arjun Patel snapped a photo, whispering to Priya, "Karma's real." Mrs. Nguyen stood at her window, clutching her rose garden photo, a tear in her eye. Mr. Ellison tipped his hat to Samantha as he passed, a quiet gesture of respect. The sight was a quiet victory, but Samantha knew the real battle was just beginning. The legal battle stretched over a year, each step a testament to Samantha's skill and determination. Janet hired a high-priced lawyer from downtown Denver, Richard Holt, a slick attorney who specialized in corporate defense and had a reputation for bullying opponents into settlements. But Holt was no match for Samantha's meticulous preparation. In court, she dismantled his arguments with a calm, ruthless precision that earned her whispers of the bulldog among the spectators. She presented her evidence like a storyteller, weaving a narrative of greed and betrayal that left the judge nodding in agreement. Holt tried to paint Samantha as a vindictive neighbor with a personal grudge, even hinting at a family feud based on the DNA connection. Samantha shut him down with a single sentence: "The only feud here is between truth and lies." The courtroom was packed with Willow Creek residents, their presence a silent show of support. Mrs. Garcia testified about her stolen backyard, her voice steady despite Holt's attempts to rattle her. Mr. Patel spoke of his annexed fence line, producing photos of his children playing in the lost space. Mrs. Nguyen's testimony about her rose garden was the most poignant, her soft voice bringing tears to the courtroom as she described planting the bushes in memory of her late husband. Tara Evans, the whistleblower, took the stand, reading Janet's emails aloud, each word a nail in the coffin of her defense. Mr. Ellison testified about the original surveys, his gravelly voice lending authority to Samantha's claims. Even David Kessler, Samantha's mentor, attended, sitting in the back with a proud smile, whispering to a colleague, "That's my girl." The judge ruled in Samantha's favor, awarding her $1.5 million in damages for defamation, fraud, and emotional distress, one of the largest awards in a Colorado HOA case. The ruling ordered the return of all stolen land to its rightful owners: Samantha's half-acre, Mrs. Garcia's backyard, Mr. Patel's fence line, the Wilsons' garden plot, Mrs. Nguyen's rose garden, the Thompsons' backyard, and parcels from 12 other neighbors. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution to affected residents, funded by liquidating Janet's assets tied to Crestview Holdings, including her Aspen vacation home, her yacht, her luxury SUV, and a hidden offshore account Maria Lopez had uncovered. The ruling made national news with headlines like "Denver Lawyer Exposes HOA Fraud Empire" and "Willow Creek's Karen Faces Justice." Legal blogs called it a landmark case, a warning to HOAs nationwide. The criminal investigation was slower but no less damning. The district attorney charged Janet with fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and money laundering, uncovering a web of financial misconduct that implicated Carl Thompson as well. Carl fled to Florida, but was arrested 4 months later on unrelated charges of tax evasion. Janet faced the consequences alone, avoiding jail through a plea deal that included 10 years of probation, a $500,000 fine, and 1,500 hours of community service. Ironic, given her claims of beautification. Her reputation was destroyed, her name a punchline in Willow Creek and beyond. She sold her gaudy mansion with its ostentatious fountain, and moved to a small apartment across town, her days of ruling the neighborhood over. For Samantha, the victory was bittersweet. The money was substantial, enough to fund a scholarship in her father's name for local students studying environmental science, a nod to his love of the land. She donated another portion to the community center, funding a new garden in Mrs. Nguyen's honor, complete with a plaque that read, Nguyen Memorial Rose Garden, for resilience and remembrance. She also set up a legal aid fund for Willow Creek residents, ensuring no one would face Janet's kind of tyranny again without support. But it wasn't about the money. It was about her father's legacy, about protecting the ranch he'd built with his own hands, about restoring justice to a community that had been manipulated for too long. The battle had consumed her life for over a year, straining her relationships and testing her resilience. She'd missed her niece's birthday, canceled dinners with Claire, and ignored calls from friends who worried she was pushing herself too hard. One evening after the verdict, she called Emily, her sister, and broke down, the weight of the fight finally hitting her. "I did it, Em," she said, her voice cracking. "I did it for Dad, for all of us." Emily listened, her voice steady over the phone. "Dad would be proud of you, Sam. You fought for what's right just like he taught us. You're his daughter through and through." The words were a balm, reminding Samantha why she'd fought in the first place. Samantha took a seat on the HOA board, not to wield power but to reform it. Under her leadership, the HOA became a model of transparency, with open meetings streamed online, a digital portal for residents to access records, and clear rules approved by a community vote. She organized neighborhood events, a summer barbecue at the Garcias, a community garden led by the Patels, a tulip planting day with the Wilsons, a rose garden dedication for Mrs. Nguyen. She started a mentorship program for young women in Willow Creek, teaching them to stand up for themselves, inspired by her own journey. She even worked with Arjun Patel, who'd started a coding club, to build an app for reporting HOA issues anonymously, ensuring no one felt silenced again. The neighborhood thrived, its residents no longer afraid to speak up, to plant what they wanted, to live without fear of a gavel's wrath. One evening, as Samantha sat on her porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, she opened her father's cedar chest again. Among the photos, letters, and old tax returns was the DNA test, its faded print a reminder of the strange twist that had tied her to Janet. The distant connection was a curiosity, a footnote in a story that had already been written. She didn't need to use it. Justice had been served and the ranch was hers unequivocally. But it reminded her of the deeper truth. This land was her family's, her father's, her home. No one, not even a Karen with a vendetta, could take that away. As she sipped her Merlot, Samantha thought of her father, his calloused hands shaping the ranch, his voice telling her to stand tall no matter what. She'd kept that promise not just for him but for herself, for her neighbors, for the community she'd fought to save. The wildflowers in the garden swayed in the breeze, their colors vibrant against the fading light. Columbine, sagebrush, Indian paintbrush, all the plants her father had loved. She felt a quiet peace, the kind that comes from knowing you fought for what matters and won. But more than that, she felt a swell of gratitude, for the land, for her neighbors, for the chance to make things right. She closed her eyes, imagining her father's smile, and whispered, "This is for you, Dad." Willow Creek transformed in the years that followed. The HOA meetings became lively discussions, not battlegrounds, filled with laughter, ideas, and the clink of coffee mugs. Neighbors planted gardens together, shared stories over potlucks, and stopped hiding behind their blinds. The community center, once a place of tension, hosted movie nights, book clubs, and a yearly wildflower festival in honor of Thomas Green, where residents planted native flowers in the restored community garden. Children ran through the fields again, their laughter echoing as Samantha's had decades ago. The ranch remained her sanctuary, its wildflowers blooming brighter than ever, a testament to her father's love and her own resilience. Across town, Janet Wilkins sat alone in her apartment, her once perfect life reduced to a few boxes and a bitter memory. She'd underestimated Samantha Green, the quiet lawyer who'd turned her own game against her. The neighbors she'd once terrorized now thrived without her, their homes and land restored, their community stronger than ever. It was a lesson she'd carry forever, a wound that cut deeper than any fine or lawsuit. She avoided Willow Creek, knowing she'd never be welcome again, her name a cautionary tale whispered over coffee and garden fences. The story of Samantha and Janet became legend in Willow Creek, a saga of power, justice, and the strength of those who stand up for what's right. It spread beyond the neighborhood, inspiring articles in the Denver Post, a segment on NPR, a feature in the New York Times, and a local theater production titled The Ranch Rebellion, which sold out for 6 weekends. Social media buzzed with #WillowCreekJustice, and Samantha received letters from strangers across the country, thanking her for showing what one person could do against a bully. A law professor at the University of Colorado invited her to guest lecture, calling her case a masterclass in community advocacy. But for Samantha it was simpler. It was about a promise kept, to her father, to herself, to the community she called home. On a quiet evening, as Samantha walked the fields of her ranch, the stars emerging over the Rockies, she felt a swell of emotion, not just pride, but hope. Hope for a future where Willow Creek could be a true community, where neighbors stood together, where the land was cherished as her father had cherished it. She paused by the wildflower garden, touching a columbine's delicate petals, and smiled. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, Thomas Green's spirit lingered, his laughter carried on the breeze, his love woven into the land. Samantha stood tall, her heart full, knowing she'd fought for his legacy and won. Not just for him, but for every neighbor who'd ever felt powerless, for every blade of grass that grew free under the wide Colorado sky. She looked up at the stars, her father's constellations shining bright, and felt a peace that was deeper than victory, a gratitude that was stronger than justice. This was home, and it was hers forever.